Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction House checking out some of the rifles that are coming up for sale in their December of 2015 premiere auction. And I wanted to pull these two out because they're not very old, but a lot of people probably aren't familiar with these, despite the fact that they have a provenance that you'll be almost certainly very familiar with. These are an SL6 and an SL7 from H&K. Now, H&K, obviously, we know for their military rifles. The HK91, also known as the G3, was an extremely popular, very prolific rifle during the Cold War. HK is the company that basically commercialized the roller locking mechanism. And for a long portion of their corporate existence, pretty much all of their guns were just different derivatives of this same roller locking system. Now, that system originated in the Mauser factory in Germany during World War II, and a bunch of the engineers who were responsible for it, when the war ended, there was this basically diaspora of German engineers, and they ended up first in France, and then a couple of these guys moved into Spain, where they helped develop the Set-Me rifle, which basically uses the same roller locking mechanism. And then eventually they made their way back into Germany, and they set up H&K, and developed this system for the German military, which adopted the G3. Now, after that, there were a number of other guns that were developed using this system, the HK93, the the MP5, those are the most common ones, but they diversified everything from submachine guns to light machine guns using the same system. And what some people probably don't realize is they also got into sporting rifles. So initially, they actually have two different versions of sporting rifles. They had a series, the 630, the 770, and the 940, which they used the exact same mechanical mechanism, but they were all set up as sporting rifles. Sporting style stocks. They had traditional sporter style sights on them. They had short stocks, no handguards, very much like semi-automatic sporting rifles. And those three, by the way, were set up basically for the 223 cartridge, the 308 cartridge, and the 30-06 cartridge in increasing receiver length. And then they had what we're looking at here today, which is a second series of guns that kind of bridge the gap between the military guns and the sporting guns. These are, like I said, the SL6 and the SL7. They are in 223 and 308. And they kind of have a few features from both ends of the spectrum. So you'll notice that they have wooden handguards, in this case ventilated for cooling. They also maintain, they have the exact same style of sights as the military rifles. They have this rear drum aperture sight, which we'll take a closer look at in a moment. And in fact, there was actually a version of the SL6 in 223 available only in Europe that has a 2-round burst capability instead of being strictly semi-automatic. So these are sort of designed as, I don't really want to say paramilitary, but kind of like police rifles, where you've got a lot of the durability and the features of a military rifle, but without the magazine capacity and without the frightening appearance, basically, and the full auto capacity. So both rifles came with 3-round flush-fitting magazines, and they also manufactured 10-round extended magazines, so you could get either one. And really, they're both the exact same gun, just scaled up and down slightly for different cartridges. So let's take a closer look at these, check out a few of the features, and see how they run. All right, starting at the back here, you can see we have all of our basic importation marks, manufacturer's marks, and this is the SL6 model, so this is the 223 rifle. Our safety is located in this not at all particularly ergonomic location because as a hunting rifle, it's not the sort of thing where you're expected to need to flip off the safety at a moment's notice. Magazine is down here. This is, of course, the 3-round flush fit version, and our magazine release is here at the front of the trigger guard. So if I push that in, magazine pops out. You'll see that's marked 223, and it's the 3-round version. Put that back in. There we go. On the military side of things, you still have the military style sling swivel for a side-mounted sling, and then up at the muzzle of the gun, you have a hook. So this would take a standard German style, military style sling. And it's interesting to note that even some things like the nose cap are attached with these very HK style captive pins. So that's kind of a neat feature on there. The front sight is a hooded blade, just like you'd find on an HK91. And the rear sight is this drum, also just like you would find on an HK91. So we've got aperture sights for 2, 3, and 400 yards, and then an open notch for 100. These two square cutouts on the top of the receiver are mounting points for a proprietary HK scope mount. Now, if we look at the right side of the receiver, we'll see the rest of our controls, namely the bolt handle. This is a folding bolt handle, and it's cammed at the very beginning of travel here. There's an interesting element to the HK roller lock design, which is in full auto, the bolt has a tendency to bounce when it closes. So the bolt will come in, hit the breech face, bounce open slightly, and then close, and kind of bounce to a stop. Now in semi-auto, this doesn't matter because it's done bouncing and it's locked in place long before the shooter is capable of firing a second shot. In full auto, however, this does occasionally cause problems where if the bolt is bounced slightly open when a round is fired, then you can have the gun act kind of like it's firing out a battery. It's a bad thing. And what they did to fix this problem was put in this big spring on the top of the bolt. This is basically a bolt lock. So when the bolt goes into battery, this spring snaps down and prevents it from bouncing. We actually see that developed by the Mauser factory during World War II. This is the reason that HK bolts are hard to open initially, is because the first thing you have to do when you're cranking the bolt open is force that spring up in order to unlock the bolt. All right, so I now have the bolt fully in battery, and when I try and lift up the charging handle, you'll see it stops here, and I'm actually camming open that bolt locking lever. So I'm getting past kind of the worst of that resistance, and then I can pull the bolt the rest of the way back. Now this is also, I think, related to why the bolt handle on these rifles is on the right side of the action. On the HK91, of course, the bolt handle is up here on the front left, along with the 93 and the MP5 and all the other iterations of that system. I believe the issue here is because this is somewhat stiff and difficult to open, the theory was you would want to actually be, if you're right-handed, you would be holding the front of the gun in your left hand, and then you would have your strong right dominant hand here, and you'd have a lot more leverage to open the bolt. I've tried it both ways, left and right-handed, and that does actually make it a lot easier to open. So I believe that's why they did this. Now there is actually one other control here, which on a military HK, what you do is pull your charging handle back and then you rotate it up into a locking notch to lock the bolt open. On these, there we go. On these guys, when you pull the bolt all the way to the rear, it does lock open. To drop the bolt, you just push in on this little button at the back and it'll drop forward. So those are the basic controls on these guys. Pretty simple, really. They make for a good sporting rifle. If you talk to owners who use these things, they typically have nothing but praise for them. Something else interesting and well worth pointing out, the trigger is an area where if you've shot a lot of HK military firearms, they're kind of renowned for having horrible, heavy, mushy triggers. Well, the reason for that is actually that the military requirements have a kind of absurdly stringent drop test requirement. The rifles have to be dropped from quite a significant distance on the buttstock and not have the trigger trip. So that's why the military HK triggers are so bad, is to pass that test. Well, a sporting rifle like this doesn't have to have that kind of requirement, and as a result, the triggers in these guns are actually fantastic. They're very light and very nice and crisp. So here's our other rifle. This is the SL-7, which is in 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO, aka 308 Winchester. Control-wise, this rifle is absolutely identical to the SL6. It is slightly larger and just a tiny bit heavier. It's actually kind of remarkable how close in weight these two rifles actually are to each other. Everything functions exactly the same. Trigger in this is also quite good. And yeah, this is kind of a matter of pick the caliber that you want and pick that rifle and it'll do you well. Interestingly, these magazines are marked 243 and 308, although these rifles were never actually released in 243 in the United States. That does make sense on a worldwide market, in that there are a number of countries where military cartridges are not legal for civilians to own, and in a situation like that, 243 it's one of several, but it's a good cartridge to offer as an alternative, and it's based on the exact same cartridge case. So things like the bolt face of a 243 is identical to the bolt face of a 308, making it pretty easy to manufacture rifles in both cartridges. Let's see, before we go, last couple of things. HK guys will be familiar with the fact that this is a fluted chamber, just like the military guns. You might be wondering about that. That's to aid on extraction, because this is a delayed blowback system, the roller locking. If you are interested in the exact mechanics of roller locking, I did a whole video on that development, and that's probably better to watch than me trying to explain it in this video right now. I will just close by mentioning that because of the roller locking, these are fixed barrel rifles. The barrels don't move. There's very little going on here mechanically when the guns fire, and these are renowned to be very accurate rifles, the H&K Sporters. So really a cool piece of fairly recent firearms history. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm sure some people are going to have been familiar with these and not consider them forgotten weapons at all. On the other hand, I'm sure there are quite a few of you guys who didn't realize that HK kind of got into this sporting rifle realm. These rifles were available in the US in the 1980s and then kind of lost their popularity, and they're no longer imported. So haven't been for quite some time, in fact. So they're fairly scarce guns in the US. If you would like to have either one of them for yourself, there's nothing to prevent these from being fantastic hunting rifles to this very day. And if you take a look at the links in the text description below, you can find the catalog pages for both of these guns. Now, if I remember correctly, in this particular auction, there is also a 630, a 223 full sporter style rifle. So I'll leave it up to you to flip through the catalog and find that one for yourselves. But you can place bids online, you can come down here in person. Either way, I think you'll enjoy the auction, and thanks for watching.